Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle, and today we are 750 feet underground in the Guadalupe Mountains in Carlsbad Cavern. Ranger Dan has agreed to take us on a tour of such to tell us about this amazing place. So, Ranger Dan, thank you so much for letting us come down here today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You have a beautiful home.
I do like my home a whole lot. I don't get to see the sun very much. That's why we're doing it down here. I might burn up on the surface.
So a little vampire-ish
A little vampire
thing going on here.
Yeah.
Well, Ranger Dan, tell us how you got to this particular spot, some of your schooling.
I got to this location of employment in my life by completing a general BA, Bachelor's in Geology at Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. I first started off with the Park Service in 2012, going into my senior year with an internship at Oregon Caves National Monument and Preserve in southwestern Oregon. From there, after I graduated, I worked with the Forest Service in Southeast Alaska at another cave, guiding tours there. From there, I then learned that stipends do not pay bills, so I must find a real job. And so I applied back at Oregon Caves National Monument in 2014, and I worked there for 2 seasons. In 2016, I went to Grand Canyon National Park. From there, it was to Mammoth Cave during the winter, and then back to Grand Canyon, and that was all seasonal work. So I worked 6 months at a time, and then I had to find new employment every single winter. I got lucky with one winter gig, but then at the end of my Grand Canyon career in 2017, I became lucky enough to have a permanent job here at Carlsbad Caverns National Park, and I've now been employed for a year and a half at this location full-time.
Have you always been a nerd?
I guess you could classify myself as a nerd. In today's world, I guess the nerds are looked at as pretty cool people,
Absolutely.
especially having the scientific background. Yeah.
So you liked outdoor stuff as a kid?
Oh yes, I was big into outdoor activities. I'm from Minnesota, and if you don't have a cabin in Minnesota, it's kind of an odd thing. And so my family has property up in northern Minnesota. I've always gone hiking, boating, canoeing, fishing, and that's just transferred into my adult life. And I've amplified that even more so by now incorporating caving into my life as well and exploring the underworld.
Well, Ranger Dan, you're the expert here, so I just want to ask you a few questions about this place, your home, and see what you can tell us. So, a little bit of history about Carlsbad Cavern.
Carlsbad Caverns National Park actually did not become a national park until 1930, and this place was not discovered, if we go by actual exploration dates, until about the year 1900. A 16-year-old kid named Jim White was working down on a ranch beneath the park, down the mountainside. And he looked up and he saw what he thought was smoke coming off the horizon. At that time, he went to inspect the smoke, and he realized that the smoke is behaving wildly. And he saw the immersion of hundreds of thousands of bats coming out of the ground. And he followed that trail to the natural entrance of Carlsbad Caverns National Park. So 16-year-old Jim White was the first known documented explorer for Carlsbad Caverns National Park. But before that, we actually have evidence of native peoples knowing about this cave. We have pictographs in the natural entrance of the cave, and in the surrounding area there's mescal roasting pits, manos and metates, and we found all sorts of other artifacts to suggest that they were not only just using the area in front of the cave, but potentially living out there as well. But they never made their way down into the cave system as near as we can tell. We have no evidence to support that they were the earliest explorers, but they did know about the cave, so we have to give them the credit for that for sure.
Well, so we know that we're in the Guadalupe Mountains. What other landmarks are there? Some kind of desert here, or some kind of? Tell me about the word that I cannot pronounce.
You are in the Guadalupe Mountains right now, and they do stretch for a ways in this area of New Mexico and the northern part of Texas. And the desert that you are currently underneath is the Chihuahuan Desert.
Chihuahuan. And ecosystems. Tell me about some of the ecosystems around here.
Oh, some of the ecosystems. It's mostly a dry place because it is the Chihuahuan Desert. We barely see any moisture. Maybe 10 inches a year will actually fall into this part of the world. We'll get a little bit more alpine as you go up into the mountains, but it's still extremely dry in this area. And out in the basin, it's actually extremely different from where we are right now. there are less pokey plants, if you want to put it that way, out in the basin, which
It's
is
a great way to describe it.
yeah, there's not as many cacti out there that you would actually think there should be. This vegetation is a little bit more sparse, but as you move closer and into Carlsbad Caverns National Park in the Guadalupe Mountains, the vegetation becomes a little bit more dense, and you have to wear clothing that will protect you a little bit more. So there are definitely other ecosystems that change as you go closer to the mountains. Plants become more diverse going into the mountains themselves, and going up onto the tops of the mountains, you actually find trees again. You find ponderosa pines, which you do not have very much of down in this area, nor in the basin as well.
Well, what about animals?
Animals, we actually have a ton of different animals. Some of the most notable animals that we have here, you can call them a peccary. Other people, the more common name around here is the javelina. And they look like a pig or a boar, but their closest relative is actually the hippopotamus. So they're not related in any way to pigs at all. We do have mule deer, not like the white-tailed deer or the black-tailed deer of different parts of the country, but we have the mule deer. And a different piece of wildlife that we have here in the national park in this area of New Mexico is the Barbary sheep. They are not native to North America. They're actually brought in from Africa in the early 1900s. And there's not many mountain lion around here, so their numbers flourish, and they are kind of unchecked in this area right now. There are very, very few black bear around here, but they do exist. We have not seen one inside the park for a number of years, though. But those are the types of megafauna that we have. Then we have all sorts of different rattlesnakes around here. So the Chihuahuan Desert,
in here, right?
not inside the cave.
Okay.
No, it is too cold for them to exist down here. All sorts of rattlesnakes out there. We've got lizards. We've got the gigantic desert centipede that scares some people. We find them in our office every once in a while, and that always creates a ruckus. We've trapped them in our hats and gotten them outside that way. But we're talking a centipede that's about this long. We have tons of different scorpions. And some of the most famous residents of this area are the bats that we have here as well.
Yeah.
Specifically the Brazilian free-tailed bats. They were commonly referred to as Mexican free-tailed bats, but the Brazilian free-tailed bat was discovered first. Mexican free-tailed was a subspecies to be thought under the Brazilian free-tails. Recent DNA testing has proved they're the exact same bat, but they migrate in this area and go south for the winter into Mexico, and then we are just at the beginning of their migration back up, actually into Carlsbad Caverns.
So they're kind of famous, though, because the first explorer, that's how he sort of found this place. He saw those bats circling and coming out. So
yes.
Even though bats make me a little creepy feeling, we have to give them a little credit.
Oh yes, and I don't think they're creepy at all. They might look a little interesting, but you spend enough time close to bats, you're going to think that they're actually very cute. Find the close-up pictures, and they might have wrinkles and what we might think of like, oh, that's deformed face. But every little crease, every hair, every orientation of the ear is for some purpose for what that bat is specifically designed for. And the bats around here, they help out farmers a lot. They go after flying beetles and moths that would devastate the crop production of this area. In North America alone, over $3 billion is saved for U.S. farmers because of bats eating insects, which is less pesticides that go into our foods and everything else.
Okay, I like them just a little bit more.
Yeah.
So we've talked about animals and plants, but we're inside this amazing place. And all of these formations, our kids know some of the names stalactites and stalagmites, but can you just take us on a quick tour, if you will, just around here? What's what? Where are the columns? And
Okay.
do your thing.
So we have, Carlsbad Caverns is famous for the amount of formations that we have and the diversity of formations that we have, and also their size. Off in the background behind us, we have formations that are over 40 feet tall, over 60 feet tall, which it makes us famous for that amount. But you talked about the stalactites. We have them hanging down. It's everything that you can see looks like icicles off in the distance of us here. The stalactite holds tight to the ceiling. Behind us directly, we have our stalagmites that are growing up from the ground. Stalagmite, you might trip over it because it's on the ground. that got me through college.
Excellent.
And then you have columns all over the place. They're a little bit far off in the distance to see with this perspective here, but it's when a stalactite and a stalagmite come together. So you can call them a column at that point.
Well, so that takes a long time to happen though, right?
Oh, yes.
So what is the growing time for a stalactite or a stalagmite?
The growing rate for a formation anywhere, actually in any cave across the planet, is not something that we can just calculate by having like an equation and taking like the height, the diameter, anything like that, and plugging those variables in. What we actually have to do is sample the formation, harvest it actually. And we'd have to do that for every single formation to find its growth rate basically. But it's variable throughout time. Right now, Carlsbad Caverns is actually relatively dry. We would classify this as an inactive cave.
Okay.
Only about 10% of this cave is wet. That's because very little moisture is on the surface due to the Chihuahuan Desert. A hot, dry climate only allows a little bit moisture to come down here. So we'd have to change the climate on the surface in order to let water come down into the cave and activate everything that we are seeing here. So all these formations are kind of stagnant with their growth right now. So if we have more water coming in here, then the formations are going to grow. But there's variables at hand that make that happen. How much water is coming into the cave? How much calcite is dissolved in that water? How acidic is the water? What's the temperature of the cave, the humidity? All these different factors come into play when we're talking about how fast a formation might grow. And we can finally figure that type of stuff out by looking at the formation itself, one in particular, and sampling it and taking it to a laboratory and doing some further explanation or further examination that way.
But you're only allowed to do that because we can't touch stuff in here.
Correct, and I don't touch stuff either because I don't actually take any of these formations. I touch the one up on the surface that people are allowed to touch.
And why can't we touch it, Ranger Dan?
We have oils on our hands that will permanently damage this cave over time. It will create a layer where the cave won't be able to form at all. It'll just, water and oil just does not mix. And so the water that's coming in with the calcite will just be shunted off. Also, the physical abrasion by our hands over time, even though our hands are so soft and the formations are about the density of our teeth, our hands would actually erode the formation over time, taking it away, stripping away the layers, the thousands of years that it took to actually make this and change it for the worse, because there's not too much down here that changes rapidly at all. Kind of like how there's footprints on the moon. If you leave a footprint in sediment down here, there's nothing to change it, and it will stay down here in sediment unless something drastic happens in this environment.
So with erosion and weathering that we experience above ground, you can experience the same thing here, but a human would have to do it.
We would have to incorporate that in as a human variable, but water, if it were to flow through here like it flows on the surface, could carve out some passages. Could, but Carlsbad Caverns has not exhibited flowing water through it really at all. There's air movement down here that can actually erode formations and also create or widen passages a little bit more as well. But one of the biggest things for us is like a change in chemistry in the water. So if the water's coming down and it becomes too acidic, then it will actually erode the formation chemically that it's dropping onto or a piece of the floor.
All right. Well, when I looked at the brochure before we came down, there were a lot of beautiful names that were given to this. Who named this place? I mean, come on, did someone just walk around and see things and see it in their head and come up with these names?
The names of formations inside the cave, a lot of them, especially in the big room area, are derived from Jim White. So he was one of the first explorers to come down here. And for example, there's a passageway that we take tours down called Left Hand Tunnel. We're in the big room right now. Left Hand Tunnel is called Left Hand Tunnel because it's left of the big room. We also have the King's Palace tour that we bring people on. Jim White goes in there. He sees the beautiful decorated chambers and thinks it's fit for a king. so it derives the name King's Palace. There's a formation inside the cave called Witch's Finger, and it looks like a craggly witch's finger sticking up a large stalagmite, and the names kind of come to you. In modern days, there are some references to modern day things out in the world, but you cannot name it after a living person.
Okay.
That's an unwritten rule in the caving community. But everything you're looking at here was named for a certain reason. Off in the distance, we have the Rock of Ages formation, and that came about in the time of the first superintendent of the park, Colonel Bowles, and people used to sing the hymn Rock of Ages in the dark when all the lights were turned off and right next to that formation. So everything kind of has a purpose around it. But one that I'm not quite sure about is what we're actually standing in front of that you might not be able to see with the camera, but this is the Temple of the Sun formation. I don't know why it's called the Temple of the Sun.
Okay.
My best guess is the amount of stalactites that hang down here, kind of like the rays of the sun coming down.
I like that explanation.
That's the best I can give, but I don't know the true origin of it. Yeah.
So we've talked about inside the cave and how we want to be very careful to take care of this place. We also know that where we are, there's some fracking happening. Can you tell us about, is fracking hurting this cave?
As far as we can tell, we have no evidence to support that fracking is harming this cave system. We don't know what's going to happen in the future because that's the future. But as of right now, we have no evidence to support that fracking is harming this cave system. The thing that we are worried about on the surface is our night sky. We are trying to become a dark sky park. And with all of the lights from the oil field, it is rather hard to become a dark sky park. We still have the opportunity to become one, but it does look like the town of Carlsbad is sprawling out into the oil field, but it's still 20 miles away. So that's our biggest concern here. With Carlsbad and the fracking industry.
So talking about the night sky, we know that Chaco Canyon has that night sky designation. What do you have to have that designation?
So you must have you have to fit into a criteria. There are measurements that you have to take, and you have to have a certain number of measurements in order to actually become a dark sky park. The higher your measurement is, your number actually on the scale, the darker your park is actually going to be. From there, you have to be conscious of what you actually are doing with the lights inside the park and the surrounding area as well. So we actually have some lights in this park that just shine straight up for no reason. As do many parks as well. And so we have to go around, inventory those lights, take pictures of them, and then make them more night sky conscious, night sky friendly. So they'd be, instead of having just a light bulb hanging down that would shine up and all over the place, instead it would be at least like a hood going over that light bulb to direct the light from horizontal and downward. Or have a directional hood to directly point it down to the ground to light up the specific area that you need it to. Put your lights on a timer, things like that, so you're not polluting the sky with extra light that it does not need.
And we're actually using that technology in cities across the country now. Neighborhoods are coming together and saying we don't want to pollute the night sky. So they are using those particular bulbs that direct the light down and not just up into the sky.
Exactly.
Well, you said that Jim White came through at the natural entrance of the cave, but there's also a rope hanging somewhere. Can you tell us about the rope?
Yes, so there is a 255-foot-long rope hanging at a place in the big room called Top of the Cross, and it's the tallest point inside this cave. Now, that rope was put there in 1985 by a group of people who were explorers of the caves of this area. They worked for some of the agencies around here as well, not just the National Park Service. And they all got together and decided we'd like to go explore that gigantic hole in the ceiling at the tallest point in the room. And they had to devise a system in order to get a rope up there because there's no other passageway that would connect to any other parts of that cave, So what they did is they got a large piece of balsa wood, a nice big, a light but heavy-duty wood that would withstand some weight on it. They got latex party balloons filled with helium, tied them to that curved frame of balsa wood, and had paracord, a lightweight cord but is rather durable. And using large binoculars and also lights, people would direct the balloon and the contraption all the way up to the ceiling. And after a few nights of trying this, they were able to hook that curved piece of balsa wood around a formation up in the ceiling, and it was a stalagmite like what we're seeing behind us here. From there, they actually tied a climbing rope onto the end of one of the pieces of paracord and fished it up, around, and back down to the other side. So this is over 500 feet of climbing rope that they had. They secured one side and then began to climb up the other. But you want to make sure that your rope will hold, so you have to test it out a little bit. So you climb up and you start jumping on the rope and to see if it will hold your weight at about 180 feet. But you do it like about 20 feet off the ground. That's the big thing.
Right, you don't start all the way up.
You don't start all the way up and then start jumping, because that's a recipe for badness.
Well, that gives me an idea for an engineering design challenge.
Okay.
Wonder if our kids could design and create a new device that would be used as a descender. What would they have to think about?
So a descender is a piece of equipment that cavers will carry around with them so they can go down deep pits. Now, for the case of the spirit world, what we were just talking about, they had to go up using ascenders, and then they would use their descender to come back down. But deep pits are classic in caves, and the Guadalupe Mountains have tons of them. There are two common styles of descenders that are out there, and the first is called a rack, and it is almost simply a piece of stainless steel or aluminum that has bars that you interlock and the rope will feed through it.
Okay.
And you increase the friction points by having more of them. And you can compress those bars or you can loosen them to increase or decrease the amount of friction that you want to apply. More friction, you go slower. Less friction, you go faster. You want to go slower so you don't heat up your rope while you're going down. So that's the first style. The rack style is actually commonly used in America. And over in Europe, there is another style called a bobbin, where it's got it's got one gigantic pivot point in the middle where you would feed the rope around like in an S shape. And that's your contact points. And if you put more friction on a carabiner, you can actually reduce how fast you're going to descend, because you need to have your bobbin and a carabiner, or a special type of carabiner called a freno, to increase your friction going down it. Some of the bobbins have a stop on them as well. Now, this should not be used as your general safety, but it's a safety measure that's been placed there by the manufacturers of them. So that's the style that we use inside the park, are the racks and bobbins, and it's a personal choice of what we use inside the park here.
So adventures and caving, spelunking is something that people really like to do. So this engineering design challenge could really give you an opportunity, students, to prototype something based on what you have already heard, but make it even better, and then possibly get that out there to a shark of some type that could help you. Well, kids, this has been a great day in our cave, but I'm going to let Ranger Dan talk to you just for a few more minutes. Ranger Dan, there's some kids out there right now that have wanted to work in national parks, but this is our first cave event. So I know there's some now that are thinking, I want to work like this. How did you figure out this is what you wanted to do, and then what can they do right now? If you'll just give them an idea.
My story is a little bit different for what I wanted to do. It all starts with that internship. I had no plans to become a park ranger in 2012. I was figuring on getting a master's program or a master's degree in the paleoclimate programs across the country. But if you want to work for the National Park Service, one of the best ways is to volunteer with a park around your area. Volunteer with the state parks in your area. Just donate your time. That looks amazing on a resume when you are looking to apply for jobs. And also become an intern. If you want to become an intern in the earth sciences and put your time in that way, that's another beautiful way to start working for the national parks. And we recognize what time you've put in, the experience that you've had working with the public, working in the backcountry settings, preserving and protecting the environment in many different ways. And there's a lot of different ways you can actually get into the National Park Service. It's not just what I do as interpretation. You can also work with resource management, who do all sorts of studies inside the parks. They do impact programs to see how many people can come into Carlsbad Caverns. That's a study that's being worked on right now. They take care of the plants, the animals, everything. You could, if you wanted to, work in the maintenance division of the national parks. We need more maintenance people. And also, there's law enforcement too, and many other divisions of the national parks in the National Park Service that you can actually work for. So we can fit what you would like to work in. And if you want to do this, you would then create a profile on usajobs.gov. We don't get bumped around like the military. We actually apply for the jobs that we want to work at. So every park ranger that you ever see has put a job in, just like your parents have at home, to work at their specific companies or organizations. And we just go through the waiting process like everyone else. But you can become a national park ranger very easily if you want to.
Well, we see that Ranger Dan has a lot of skills. He knows a lot of stuff about the park, and he studied paleoclimatology.
Paleoclimatology.
Yes, I said that word pretty good.
Yeah.
But one of the skills that I see that he has great grasp on is communication. So that's what you can do too. Find opportunities just to talk to people. Go home and talk to your parents. Ask them how their day was. Have conversations with your classmates, with professors, with teachers, with people in the community, because that'll get you someplace too. Ranger Dan, you are brilliant. This has
Thank
been
you.
Absolutely amazing. I know our kids have enjoyed it. I want to encourage you to check out Carlsbad Caverns on the nps.gov site. We are in the state of New Mexico, so you can filter that out. It's been a great day. This is Dr. Drizzle, out.